On my 60th birthday, I blew out the candles and made one wish: to disappear. Not because I wanted to die, but because I wanted to live. Truly live. For the first time in decades, I packed one suitcase, left a note on the kitchen table, and drove until the highway swallowed the past behind me. Now, before you ask, yes, Eleanor is my name. And yes, I'm painfully aware that disappearing on your own birthday sounds like the plot twist in a late-night drama special. But trust me, honey, the real story is much juicier. I didn't leave because of one moment. I left because of a million tiny cuts. My family had been carving pieces out of me for years, all while calling it love. My husband, Bill, perfected the art of pretending I wasn't in the room unless he needed a fresh cup of coffee or a clean shirt. My daughters, God bless them, they treated me like a broken vending machine that sometimes dispensed money but was mostly just in the way. And in every conversation, every holiday, every obligation where my name was spoken only when they needed something, I felt myself shrinking. By 60, I'd become a ghost in my own life. So that birthday morning, instead of cutting the cake, I cut the cord. I left the note a polite "don't worry, I'm fine," though I wasn't, and drove 3 states away, past all reasonable logic, propelled by a strange cocktail of fear, exhilaration, and the quiet certainty that if I didn't save myself now, no one ever would. As I crossed the state line into New Mexico, the sky stretched open like a blessing. The sunsets looked like someone spilled a box of watercolors across the horizon. The silence out there wasn't empty. It felt like a hand smoothing the wrinkles out of my soul. I rented a tiny casita outside Tao's adobe walls, mismatched furniture, a temperamental stove I learned to coax like a stubborn old mule, and breathed for the first time in decades. But here's the thing no one tells you: freedom is loud. It echoes. The first night alone in that casita, the quiet felt like a scream. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, wondering who exactly I thought I was. A runaway senior? A born-again rebel? A woman who'd finally lost her marbles? The loneliness hit like a punch. I had no one to talk to but myself, and I wasn't yet sure I even liked her. The second morning, I dragged myself into the only cafe within walking distance, a little place run by a woman named Marcia who had a braid down to her hips and the sarcasm of a retired comedian. She glanced at me like she'd seen this exact species of runaway bird before. "Coffee?" she asked. "If it's strong enough to burn away regret." She nodded. "Extra shot it is." That cup of coffee was my first small victory. I drank it sitting alone at a table by the window, watching strangers live their lives while mine quietly rearranged itself inside me. And I realized something. I hadn't disappeared. I'd relocated. Over the next week, I began piecing myself back together. Bought a dusty old bike, learned the name of the neighbor's dog who liked to wander into my yard and judge me with the wisdom of a furry monk. Took long walks until my calves felt like firewood and my thoughts quieted enough to hear my own heartbeat again. I didn't know who I was becoming, but I knew she was braver than the woman I left behind. One evening, while browsing a tiny bookstore, the kind with creaky floors and an owner who looked like he survived Woodstock, I found myself crying in the poetry aisle. Not delicate tears either. Full, shoulder-shaking sobs that made the poor man behind the counter ask if he should call someone. "No," I sniffled, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my sweater. "These are hopeful tears." He nodded very slowly, probably reconsidering allowing unsupervised adults into his store. But something cracked open in me that night. The grief, the guilt, the years of neglect, they started loosening their grip, just enough to let hope slip through. A few days later, I met the first real friend of my new life. Her name was Carmen. She was 70, fierce as a wildfire, and introduced herself by saying, "You look like a woman who needs someone to tell you you're doing the right thing." I laughed so hard I nearly choked. We shared enchiladas at a roadside stand and swapped life stories the way teenagers trade secrets, fast, reckless, and hungry for connection. She told me about leaving her own husband at 55 after waking up one morning and realizing she hadn't laughed in 3 years. "A woman who forgets her own joy," she said, wagging her finger, "is dangerous." To herself and everyone around her. Carmen became my anchor, my mirror, my proof that starting over wasn't madness, it was medicine. But the real turning point, the first tremor of rebirth, came on a night I didn't expect. I'd been in Taos barely 2 weeks when I wandered into a community art class in an attempt to socialize without the commitment of full conversation. And that's where I met him, a man with kind eyes and paint under his fingernails. His name was Jack. Lord help me, I wasn't looking for a man. Not after the wasteland of intimacy I'd endured. But Jack didn't flirt. He didn't try to charm me. He simply asked if I knew how to mix the shade of blue I wanted. It was ridiculous how that simple act undid me. When he guided my hand gently, respectfully, I felt something thaw that had been frozen for years. Not romance, not longing, something more important, possibility. That night, walking back to my casita under a sky littered with stars, I realized the woman I used to be, the timid, pleasing, forgotten version of Eleanor, had finally taken her last breath somewhere on that long stretch of highway. She died without ceremony, without mourners, without a eulogy. And in her place, a new woman was slowly inhaling her first breath. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know that, soon enough, my phone would start buzzing with frantic messages from the children who suddenly remembered I existed. I didn't know how hard it would be to decide whether to answer, but I did know this. For the first time since I was a girl, I felt alive. I woke up the morning after meeting Jack with a feeling I didn't quite recognize at first. Took me a minute to place it. It wasn't anxiety or dread or the usual weight of responsibilities that weren't mine to carry. No, it was lightness, like someone had lifted an invisible anvil off my chest while I slept. And then I remembered the way Jack had said, so simply, try a little more blue, you're almost there, and how the encouragement slid into a part of me no one had spoken to in years. Not the obedient wife part, not the guilty mother part, but the artist I'd buried so long ago I forgot she had a pulse. The sun was warm through the little adobe window. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender from the thrift store detergent I'd bought. It was the first time in decades I woke up in a place that didn't hold the ghosts of arguments, expectations, or old routines. I stretched like a cat and laughed to myself. Eleanor, I said out loud, you might just reinvent yourself yet. My second week in Taos was a strange blend of loneliness and awakening. It's funny, people assume when you leave your old life behind, the loneliness disappears. But the truth is, the silence just becomes honest. No more pretending you're okay because someone else needs you to be. The quiet grows teeth at first, nibbling at every insecurity you've tried to ignore. But then, slowly, it starts to feel like something softer. Space, breath, possibility. I filled my days with small triumphs. Braving the local grocery store, learning the winding backroads without ending up in Santa Fe by accident, figuring out that the stove only lit if you turn the knob with just the right amount of impatience. Every day I felt a little bolder, a little more like someone choosing life instead of enduring it. One afternoon, Carmen invited me to her home, a bright little adobe house with orange walls, wind chimes made from spoons, and a library of self-help books she never actually read. They're just for decoration, she admitted, waving her hand. I prefer tequila to therapy. We sat in her backyard under the shade of an old juniper tree. She handed me a glass of cold hibiscus tea and asked, so, what's the real story? Women don't leave home at 60 unless something burst open. I hesitated, a familiar instinct. Years of training myself not to cause trouble or make anyone uncomfortable. But here, with Carmen, I felt safe enough to tell the truth. My family, I started, then stopped. That word had become a bruise. They didn't see me anymore. I was a resource, not a person. Carmen nodded so deeply it nearly dislodged her earrings. Oh, honey, I know that song. I could sing harmony. I told her about the exhaustion, the thankless years, my husband's dismissive silence, my daughter's constant demands, how birthdays and holidays became chores instead of celebrations. How long were you married? She asked. 38 years. And happy? 38 years minus roughly 37. She choked on her tea, laughing. You stayed that long, why? Because I thought it was noble. Because I taught myself that endurance was a form of love. Because I thought leaving was selfish. Because the world told women like me we were supposed to be grateful for scraps. But I simply said because I forgot I was allowed to want things. Carmen leaned over and squeezed my hand. Well, now you remember. Later that week, I returned to the art class. I pretended it was casual. But let's be honest, I wanted to see Jack again. I wore a blouse that made my eyes look bluer, purely by coincidence, of course. When I walked in, he looked up from his canvas and smiled, the kind of smile that isn't flashy or flirtatious, but honest. Like he was genuinely glad to see me. You came back, he said. Didn't want you thinking I'm the kind of woman who quits after one bad sketch. Sketches aren't bad, he replied. They're just early. Now tell me that isn't the most unexpectedly romantic thing a man could say. We worked side by side for an hour, mixing paints, sharing space. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be around a man who wasn't waiting for me to rescue him emotionally, or feed him, or apologize for something I didn't do. Jack asked where I was from, and I told him the truth. Somewhere I'm not planning to return to. He nodded. Sometimes we outgrow entire landscapes. Later, as I washed my brushes, he said, "There's a gallery opening Friday night. Small, nothing fancy. If you'd like to go, I could save you a seat." That old version of me, the one who checked schedules, worried what others thought, almost answered for me. But she was gone now, or at least fading fast. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Yes, I'd like that." And just like that, something shifted. Not romantic fireworks or destiny or any of that nonsense, just a subtle unlocking. A door I didn't know was sealed shut began to ease open. When I got home that evening, my phone was blinking on the counter. I hadn't paid attention to it much, a delightful rebellion, honestly. But when I checked it, the messages hit like a storm. 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 6 texts, all from my daughters. The messages grew increasingly frantic. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering? Dad is worried. We need to talk. This isn't funny. Call us now." Funny. Now that they needed something, my absence was suddenly an emergency. I stared at the screen, the old guilt scratching at the edges of my newfound peace. The Eleanor of 10 years ago would have called back instantly. The Eleanor of 1 year ago would have apologized, explained, justified. But the Eleanor of now? She plugged the phone into a drawer, closed it gently, and whispered, "No." I made myself a cup of tea, stepped outside, and let the desert night wrap around me like a blanket. The moon was huge, ancient, fearless. And in its glow, I felt something solid forming inside me, the beginning of a backbone I thought I'd lost long ago. They could call all they wanted. I wasn't ready to hear their voices. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because for the first time at 60, I had a life to protect. I didn't sleep much the night after I ignored all those messages. I wasn't afraid, not exactly, but there's a particular kind of electricity that runs through your veins the first time you choose yourself over the people who've always expected access to you. It's like stepping outside in a storm with no umbrella. Exhilarating, and a little dangerous. I lay there in my tiny casita, listening to the old ceiling fan wobble and tick, my heart thumping like a woman half my age. Every so often, the silence would coax in a whisper of doubt. What if they really need you? What if something's wrong? Then, like a stern ant with good sense and sharp earrings, another voice answered, "If they needed you, they should have remembered you before they lost you." By sunrise, I had made coffee strong enough to unstick moral dilemmas, sat at my little table, and watched the desert turn gold. Something in that morning felt like a clean page. No guilt, no obligations, just me and the quiet promise that I could build a different life now. But you can't outrun your past without it trying to chase you. And mine didn't like being left behind. At 9:12 a.m., as I was attempting to coax my bike's stubborn chain back into place, footsteps crunched on the gravel behind me. "Trouble with that?" A voice asked, deep, a little raspy, and entirely too soothing for a Tuesday. It was Jack. Good Lord, that man looked unfairly handsome for someone who probably didn't even use moisturizer. He wore a faded denim shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal strong forearms, the kind of forearms that could fix things, lift things, or ruin a woman's peace of mind if she wasn't careful. "Oh, you know," I said, wiping grease on my jeans, just trying to prove I'm an independent woman. "The chain disagrees." He knelt beside me, inspecting the bike. "Independence doesn't mean doing everything alone. Sometimes it just means choosing who gets to help." I swear, if that man ever decided to give motivational speeches, he could cause a nationwide epidemic of women over 50 running off to the desert. He fixed the chain into minutes flat. "Thank you," I said, feeling unexpectedly shy, not because he helped, but because I liked that he'd shown up exactly when I needed someone. That felt more intimate than anything romantic. "You always show up at the right time?" He shrugged. "Some people just have a knack for seeing what needs attention." And there it was, the gentle recognition I'd been starving for most of my adult life. Not the kind that demanded anything in return, just kindness. We agreed to meet Friday for the art gallery opening. I spent the rest of the day pretending I wasn't excited. Even cleaned the casita, by which I mean I relocated dust from one surface to another and called it progress. By late afternoon, the temperature dipped, and the desert wind carried that familiar hint of loneliness. I pulled on a sweater and walked to the cafe. Marcia, the owner, eyed me over her reading glasses. "You look like a woman with secrets," she said. "Oh, I've got a whole filing cabinet." She poured me coffee with a flourish. "Want to talk about it or let the caffeine do the heavy lifting?" I chose caffeine, but apparently, it loosened my tongue anyway. "I left my family," I blurted out. Marcia nodded like I'd confessed nothing more dramatic than switching laundry detergents. "Good," she said. "I left mine when I was 48. They still send me Christmas cards addressed to the daughter who thinks she's better than everybody." "You want a muffin with that?" I snorted, loudly. A man at the next table actually dropped his spoon. We talked well. She talked, and I listened. She told me stories about women who drifted into town on the winds of trouble or reinvention. "Taos is a refuge," she said, tapping her mug. "We get the runaways, the dreamers, the broken, and the reborn. Sometimes all in the same person." I asked her how long it took to feel whole again. "That depends." She studied me. "How much of yourself are you willing to stop apologizing for?" That hit hard, because I'd been apologizing my whole life for needing things, wanting things, dreaming things. I apologized for being tired, for being angry, for being human. And I definitely apologized away pieces of myself in that old house, in that old life. I walked home thinking about that question. How much of myself was I finally ready to claim? 2 days later, on Thursday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone exploding like it had swallowed a firework. 10 missed calls, 20 texts, 3 voicemails from my daughters, and one from Bill. I opened it against my better judgment. "Eleanor, where are you? This is childish. Call me childish." There it was. The old hook, the old bait, the old attempt to make me feel like the unreasonable one. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling my spine straighten inch by inch. Then I typed, "I'm safe. I'll contact you when I'm ready." And nothing more. I didn't ask how they were, didn't promise to come back, didn't justify, didn't shrink. For the first time in decades, I sent a message that didn't bend around anyone's expectations. I felt taller just pressing send. That afternoon, I walked to the community center for a meditation class. Because apparently, that's what the new me did: try things, explore things, sit quietly without thinking about grocery lists or dinner or laundry or whose feelings needed managing. The instructor, a weary man named Leo, with the serene aura of someone who'd never once yelled at a malfunctioning printer, guided us through breathing exercises. "Imagine releasing all that no longer serves you," he said. Well, that list was long enough to qualify as a novel. I exhaled as if blowing out candles on an overdue truth. Then something strange happened. As I sat there breathing and letting go and trying not to fall asleep, a vision came to me, vivid and unsettling. I saw my old house, my old kitchen, the version of me who lived there, gray, tired, small. A woman who thought shrinking was noble. A woman who apologized for breathing too loudly. And in that moment, I felt something inside me break loose. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet, decisive death. Not of me, but of her. The old Eleanor. The obedient one. The one who stayed too long. The one who swallowed her own voice until it calcified in her chest. She died in that meditation room. And I whispered, so softly no one heard, "Rest in peace, sweetheart. I'll take it from here." When I walked out into the late afternoon light, everything felt sharper. The sky, the wind, even the smell of roasting chilies from a nearby food cart. I felt more alive than I had in 40 years. Just as the wind shifted, I felt my phone buzz again. A text from my daughter. "Mom, you're scaring us. Please call. Dad says this can't continue." But it could continue. And it would. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of their fear. I wasn't scared of their disappointment. I wasn't scared of being selfish. I was scared of something far worse returning to a life that had slowly erased me. I put the phone back into the drawer. Tomorrow was Friday, gallery night. A night with new people, new art, new possibilities. The old Eleanor was gone. The new one? She was just getting started. By Friday afternoon, the desert sky looked like a painting Jack himself might have mixed, wide strokes of apricot and rose spreading low toward the horizon. It felt like the world was preparing a stage for something. And honey, I was ready. I'd spent most of the day oscillating between confidence and absolute panic. It had been so long since I'd gone anywhere that wasn't a grocery store, a family obligation, or a forced holiday gathering where someone inevitably said something that made me swallow my own irritation like a jagged pill. But this wasn't any of that. This was something I wanted. A woman in her 60s choosing to attend a gallery opening with a man she barely knew well. That was downright rebellious. Delightfully so. I tried on 3 different outfits, all of which made me look like a substitute teacher on picture day. Finally, I settled on a soft teal blouse and black slacks. Understated, comfortable, and the exact opposite of anything Bill would have approved of, which felt like a personal victory. As I stood in front of the mirror, I caught my reflection mid-adjustment of my necklace. There was a glow there, subtle, unfamiliar. My eyes looked awake. My shoulders no longer slumped with the weight of a life lived for other people. I didn't look like a woman escaping something anymore. I looked like a woman stepping into something new. Jack arrived right on time. He knocked lightly, just to taps, polite but confident. When I opened the door, he grinned. "You look beautiful," he said, without embellishment or flourish. Just a simple truth stated by a man who meant it. "Well," I replied, trying to emulate some breezy confidence, "you don't look so bad yourself." He wore a charcoal shirt, sleeves rolled up again. I swear those arms were designed by a higher power, and a pair of worn-in boots that somehow made him look like both an artist and a cowboy. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. "More than you know." The gallery was small, tucked between a pottery studio and a shop that sold jewelry made from recycled silver spoons. But the moment I stepped inside, I understood what Carmen meant when she said Taos was full of rebirth. The air hummed with creativity. People spoke in low, passionate tones, and soft music trickled out from somewhere unseen. Paintings hung like windows into other people's souls, bold colors, textured layers, the raw messiness of life captured in oil and acrylic. I could feel my heartbeat shift into something lighter. Jack guided me through the rooms, introducing me to artists and locals. He never hovered or steered me. He simply walked beside me, offering gentle nudges of encouragement. At one point, we stood in front of a canvas smeared with deep reds and streaks of white. "What do you see?" he asked. I tilted my head. "A woman standing up after falling one too many times." Jack smiled. "You have a good eye. Or maybe I just have experience." We stood shoulder to shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, but not close enough to blur boundaries. It was comfortable, astonishingly so. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to step outside. Not because I was overwhelmed, though there was a flicker of that, but because I wanted to take a moment to absorb what was happening. Outside, the air was cool and crisp. The sound of soft laughter and clinking glasses drifted out behind me. I leaned against the adobe wall and let myself smile, wide and unreserved. I had carved out a new life, one I hadn't even dared dream of 6 months ago. And then, because the universe likes to test your resolve, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. A new text. "Mom, I'm serious. This has gone too far. Call us or we're contacting the police." That was from my oldest daughter, Claire, the responsible one, the one who'd turned my emotional labor into a full-time job. Seeing her name pinched something in my chest. Not guilt, more like the faint bruise left over from an injury that used to be severe. I stared at the message. Then I typed back, "I am safe. I do not require rescue. I will not be returning to the life I left. Please respect my decision." I hit send before fear had a chance to intervene. My hands trembled, not with regret, but with the thrill of setting a boundary that should have been set 20 years ago. "Everything okay?" Jack asked from the doorway. I turned to him, tucking my phone away. "It will be." He studied me for a long moment, not prying, just understanding. "Come on," he said gently. "You haven't seen the last room." The final room held sculptures instead of paintings, abstract pieces made of rusted metal and reclaimed wood. One sculpture in particular caught my attention, a tall, twisted structure that spiraled upward like a woman made of steel. Rising out of shattered pieces at her feet, there was a placard beneath it, "After the breaking." The artist, a woman with sharp cheekbones and silver hair, approached us. "Do you like it?" she asked. "It looks like survival," I said quietly. She nodded. "It is. I made it after I left my marriage at 57. Sometimes you don't realize you were breaking until you finally stop." Her words hit me like a soft hammer. Jack looked at me with something tender in his expression, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. After the gallery closed, he walked me home. The night sky was scattered with stars so bright they looked like they were gossiping about us. When we reached my casita, he hesitated, not awkward, just thoughtful. I had a good time tonight, he said. So did I. He gave me that warm smile again. I'm glad you came to Taos. I laughed softly. So am I. We didn't kiss. No grand romantic moment. Just a gentle, lingering goodbye that left me with a glow that lasted long after he walked away. Inside, I sat on the edge of my bed, kicked off my shoes, and exhaled deeply. Happiness, real happiness, felt both foreign and familiar, like a song I once loved and forgot existed. But my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail, then another, and another. 12 in total. My daughters and Bill weren't going to let go quietly. But for the first time, I wasn't scared of what they wanted, or what they'd do, or what they thought. For the first time, I wasn't scared of choosing myself, and that felt like the first breath of real freedom. The next morning, I woke up feeling like my bones were humming. Not from nerves, no. Those belonged to the old me. This was something better. Anticipation, maybe. Or the afterglow of realizing you've stepped into a version of your life you didn't think you were brave enough to live. I brewed coffee, opened the window, and let the cool desert breeze float in. The sky was washed in pale pinks and golds, like it was still half asleep. I felt strangely aligned with it, a woman rediscovering herself at dawn. But the peace didn't last long. At 8:17 a.m., the phone I'd tucked into the kitchen drawer began vibrating like it was trying to escape. I ignored it for a while, humming to myself as I washed dishes, fed the stray cat who'd adopted me, and contemplated reorganizing my tiny living room for the fourth time that week. But by the time the sun had fully climbed into the sky, the phone's constant buzzing began to seep through my resolve. I finally pulled it out. The screen was full. 17 missed calls, 8 voicemails, 5 new texts, all from my family. The latest message read, "Mom, we're serious. This isn't normal. We need to know where you are. Dad wants to file a missing person report. Answer us immediately." I laughed, an actual out loud laugh, because suddenly the absurdity of it all hit me. Now they were worried. Now they were frantic. Now they remembered I existed. For years, I'd been invisible unless there were errands to run, grandchildren to babysit, holidays to host, crises to fix, money to lend, feelings to cushion. But the second I removed myself from the draining ecosystem of their expectations, suddenly the world was ending. That's the thing about people who rely on your silence. They panic the moment you speak in actions instead of apologies. I sat on my little sofa, the messages glaring at me like a jury ready to convict. A part of me, the old part, buried but not yet fully gone, felt the familiar tug of guilt. But the new part of me, the one who'd watched the sunset with Jack and breathed deeply in the meditation room and laughed with Carmen over hibiscus tea, said, "They're not owed the version of you they broke." So I powered the phone off. Again, end of discussion. Around noon, there was a knock at my door, a gentle one, not the heavy pounding of someone who expected answers. I peeked through the window and saw Carmen standing there with a basket. I opened the door. "You bring snacks or judgment?" "Snacks," she said. "Judgment is extra." She stepped inside, placed the basket on my small table, and began unpacking it like a picnic fairy. Fresh tortillas, salsa, a small container of something suspiciously green, and God bless her, a bottle of locally made wine. "You look pale," she said, narrowing her eyes. "You been fighting ghosts?" "Not ghosts," I sighed. "Relatives." Same thing." We sat at the table and ate in comfortable silence for a while, each of us perched on wobbly chairs that creaked like elders giving advice. Eventually, Carmen looked at me and said, "They're trying to pull you back in." I nodded. "And I'm trying not to fall for it." "You won't," she said confidently, "but they'll get louder before they get quiet." I knew she was right. My children were used to the version of me who said yes out of fear they'd leave. They weren't used to the woman who'd left them. "Do you think I'm being cruel?" I asked before I could stop myself. Carmen put down her tortilla and leaned back like she was about to deliver a sermon. "No, cruelty is abandoning your mother emotionally for years, then panicking when she stops sacrificing herself on command. Cruelty is expecting a woman to break herself to keep everyone else whole." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, you're not cruel. You're healing." Her words settled over me like a balm. Healing. God, I'd forgotten the taste of that word. Later that evening, after Carmen left and the sky began melting into its usual purple dusk, I walked into town. I wasn't sure exactly where I was going. I just needed the air, needed movement, needed to let my emotions entangle themselves in the open. I found myself near the river, watching its lazy flow glisten under the fading light. A father and son were skipping stones nearby. A couple walked hand in hand, and I felt it again, that pinch of loneliness. The kind that whispers, "You're starting over alone." But then, just as quickly, something else answered, "Yes, alone and free." I closed my eyes and let that settle. When I opened them, I saw Jack walking toward me from down the path. He carried a sketchpad under his arm, his brow lifted in pleasant surprise. "I thought that was you," he said, slowing to a stop beside me. "You caught me in my natural habitat," I replied, "brooding by bodies of water." "Very poetic of me," he chuckled. "Mind some company?" Not even a little. We walked along the river bank in easy, unforced silence. The kind of silence that doesn't demand filling. I could feel his presence beside me, steady, warm, grounded. Eventually he spoke. "You seem different tonight." "How so?" "Lighter, more certain, like someone who finally understands her own worth." I stopped walking. His words hit deeper than he knew. I looked up at him. "Jack, I don't know who I am yet." He shook his head gently. "You don't need to know who you are. You just need to know who you aren't anymore." And oh, didn't that go straight to the center of me? We continued walking until the sun fully dipped below the horizon. He pointed out constellations. I told him stories about my childhood, some heartbreaking, some ridiculous. He told me about his late wife, the years they spent exploring art and traveling, and how grief had softened but never left him. There was no romantic tension, no expectation, just two people who had learned how to rise from broken places, walking side by side in the desert night. Before we parted, he said quietly, "You're building a life, Eleanor, not running from one." And for the second time that day, I felt something inside me settle in the right place. When I returned home, a voicemail notification was waiting even though I'd turned my phone off earlier. It must have snuck in during that brief moment before the screen went dark. I hesitated, then pressed play. My daughter's voice, shaky, frantic. "Mom, Dad is losing it. He says he wants to drive around until he finds you. Please, please call us. We didn't know things were this bad. We're sorry. Just come home. We'll talk, please." Once, that message would have shattered me. Once, I would have rushed back into the familiar role of caretaker, peacemaker, buffer, fixer. But now I could hear something underneath her voice, not love, not concern, but fear of losing access. Fear of losing the woman who made their lives easier by making her own life harder. I deleted the message. Then I poured myself a small glass of Carmen's wine, stood outside under the dark velvet sky, and whispered, "I'm not going home. Not this time. Not ever." And the stars above me sparkled like they agreed. By the time the next week rolled around, I had officially become the woman who strolls through town with a secret smile. You know the type. The kind of older woman you see in movies, who carries invisible stories in her eyes and looks like she knows something everyone else doesn't. Except in my case, I actually did know something. I'd saved my own life. But of course, life doesn't let a woman rebirth herself without sending a few final tests her way. And mine arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in desperation and disguised as family concern. I was sitting on the tiny patio behind my casita, sipping coffee and listening to the birds complain about the sunrise, when I heard gravel crunching. Slow, hesitant, not like a local. Locals drove like the road personally offended them. I set my mug down and peered around the adobe wall. A white sedan, a rental car, the kind used by business travelers, tourists, and husbands who want to hunt down the wife they didn't appreciate until she vanished. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Bill. My stomach tightened, but not from fear. It was more like irritation, the kind you feel when someone knocks over the sandcastle you've been building. He stood there squinting into the sun, wearing the same khaki pants he'd worn every weekend for 20 years, the same belt, the same expression, mildly inconvenienced by the world. "Eleanor," he called, as if I were a dog that had run too far from the porch. I deliberately took my time walking into view. He froze when he saw me. His jaw slackened, his eyes widening with something between shock and disbelief, like I had dared to look happier without him than I ever did beside him. "Why are you here?" I asked, calm, steady, like I already knew the answer, but wanted to hear the performance anyway. "Why am I?" "Eleanor, for good's sake," he gestured wildly. "Your daughters are worried sick." "My daughters," I said slowly, "are adults. Last I checked, guilt-tripping their mother isn't a medical emergency." He blinked hard. "This isn't funny," he snapped. You just left. You didn't tell anyone where you were going. Because I didn't want anyone stopping me. His breath hitched the first authentic reaction he'd had in years. Come home, he said, lowering his voice like we were in one of those melodramatic commercials for prescription drugs. Let's fix this. I nearly laughed. Not loudly, just the kind of laugh a woman makes when she finally recognizes an old trick. Fix this? I repeated. Bill, we didn't fix anything when we lived together. Why would that change now? He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Because leaving is extreme. You're overreacting. Overreacting. There it was. The sacred word men use when they can't control the narrative. Bill, I said gently but firmly, I didn't overreact. I overlived a life that suffocated me. And now I'm breathing again. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a fish who'd just been told the ocean was closing for repairs. You're being ridiculous, he muttered. This place, this town, this isn't real. You can't just start over at your age. Oh, sweetheart, I said, tilting my head. I can do whatever the hell I want at my age. He stared at me like he was finally seeing me not as the quiet woman who cooked his meals and folded his shirts, but as the woman who left him standing in the dust while she created an entirely new life. I'm not leaving, I continued. Not with you. Not for you. Not for anyone who only noticed I was gone when they needed something. He swallowed hard. The girls want you home. The girls want their convenience, I corrected. They want the mother who never asked for anything. I stepped closer, my voice soft but sharp enough to cut. That mother is gone. Bill looked stricken, like he wasn't prepared for the funeral of who I used to be. He tried one last Hail Mary. We can work it out. No, I said. You can work out how to live without depending on my silence. And with that, I turned and walked back toward my casita. He followed. Eleanor, don't do this. I stopped at the doorway. I did it already. Then I closed the door between us, firmly, quietly, with a finality that felt like the soft click of a lock on a healed wound. He drove away 20 minutes later. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't cry either. And that, more than anything, told me I had outgrown the tiny emotional cage he and our daughters kept me in. I sat at my kitchen table, letting the silence settle over me. Not the heavy silence of my old life, the kind that felt like punishment, but a silence full of possibility, healing, peace. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I'd won a war I wasn't even supposed to fight. That afternoon, I went to see Carmen. She was tending to her potted herbs, each one named after an ex-lover. How was your morning? She asked without turning around. My husband showed up. She froze. Slowly, very slowly, she turned to look at me. And is he buried behind your casita, or should I prepare a hiding place? I burst out laughing, the kind of laugh that makes your ribs ache. No burial, just closure. She smiled. The more civilized form of murder. I sat beside her and told the whole story. She listened, occasionally shaking her head or muttering, "Men," like it was a diagnosis. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "It's done. They'll push again, but the first break is the hardest." She was right. That confrontation had been the symbolic moment, the true death of my old self. Not the meditation, not the messages, not even the move. It was the moment I looked my former life in the face and said, "No more." That night, I went to Jack's studio. I didn't plan to. My legs simply carried me there, like they knew where healing continued. His door was open, the warm light spilling out onto the path. He looked up when he heard me and smiled, that soft, steady smile that didn't ask questions before offering comfort. "You okay?" he asked simply. "Yes," I said. "Actually, I think I'm more than okay." He motioned me inside. "Want to paint?" I nodded. We worked quietly for an hour, side by side. Two people who'd lived long enough to know that sometimes company is the cure. At one point he said, without looking up, "Standing up for yourself. It suits you." And I knew he wasn't flirting. He was recognizing me, seeing me, the real me, the one who took 60 years to meet herself. When I returned home, there were more missed calls from my daughters, more pleading, more panic. And finally, "Mom, we didn't realize how unhappy you were. Please come home so we can fix this as a family." But they were too late to notice, too late to care genuinely, too late to stop the woman I was becoming. I powered the phone off again. Then I whispered to the quiet room, "I'm not coming home. I've already found one." The morning after Bill's surprise visit, I woke up with the kind of clarity people write poetry about. The desert sun hadn't even climbed over the mountains yet, but something inside me already glowed warm and steady. My old life had tried one last time to reclaim me and failed. There is a name for that moment, you know, when a woman realizes she is not returning to the cage she once called home. Freedom, not the loud, triumphant kind splashed across movie screens, but the quiet, grounded sort, the kind that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for 40 years. I made myself a cup of jasmine tea, opened the door of my casita, and let the crisp air wash over me. I had the strange sense of being witnessed by the land itself, as if the desert had been waiting for me to finally understand my place here. I wasn't a runaway anymore. I was a resident. Around mid-morning, someone knocked, just one soft tap, followed by another. I recognized that rhythm instantly. Jack. He stood there holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh bread. Marcia made too many pastries, he said. She insisted I bring you some so she isn't forced to eat them herself. Her words, not mine. I stepped aside so he could enter. Come in. I was just thinking I needed a breakfast of questionable nutritional value. He walked in, casual and warm as ever. So, I heard there was an event yesterday. I sighed. You mean my ex-husband performing his one-man guilt-tripping tour? That'd be the one. I sat at the table, tearing a cinnamon pastry in half. He wants me home. Do you want that? Jack asked. No, I said instantly. Not even a little. He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. Sometimes the people who think they know us best are the ones who know us least. I took a slow breath, letting his words settle. I'm not scared anymore. Of what? Their disappointment, their opinions, their needs, all the things I spent my entire life organizing myself around. Jack leaned forward slightly. Then you've already won. I smiled, a soft, quiet smile that felt truer than any I'd ever worn. We talked for an hour. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. Just two people sharing morning light and pastries like old friends. Like something beginning, not ending. Before he left, he said, "Don't disappear on me." And I answered honestly, I'm not disappearing anymore. I'm showing up. Later that afternoon, I sat outside under my crooked little porch roof, sketching the mountains the way Jack had taught me. My lines were messy, my shading uneven, but every stroke felt like I was learning a new language. A language that translated feeling into form. That's when my phone, long neglected on the table inside, buzzed again. I ignored it at first, then again, and again, until finally, fed up with the vibrations, I went inside and looked. 3 texts, 1 voicemail, all from my daughters. I almost deleted them without opening, but something inside me said, a woman who knows her worth is allowed to look without being hooked. So I listened. My eldest daughter's voice was raw, shaky. Mom, we're sorry. Dad told us what happened. We should have seen how unhappy you were. We took you for granted. Please come home so we can start over. Please. My middle daughter chimed in next. Mom, I promise things will be different. We'll come see you more. We'll help out more. Just tell us where you are. And then the youngest, sounding like a child trying to hold on to a parent she'd accidentally pushed afar. Mom, we miss you. We didn't mean to hurt you. It would have broken me once upon a time. Would have gutted me actually. But now I heard something beneath their voices, not malice, not manipulation exactly, but desperation. The kind that comes when a woman they depended on finally puts herself first. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long minute. Then I said softly but firmly, you waited too long, and I powered it off. Not out of anger, but out of truth. Because sometimes the door to your past needs to close fully so the door to your future doesn't stay stuck. The next morning, I found Carmen on her porch, watering her basil plant named Javier after the least honest man she ever dated. You look resolved, she said without looking up. I am. She set down her watering can. You've crossed the canyon, haven't you? I nodded. And I'm not climbing back. She clapped once, victorious. Good. Now we can move on to the rebuilding stage. The what? The rebuilding stage, she repeated. The best part, where you fill your life with everything that makes you breathe easier. And what does that involve exactly? She winked. Whatever you want. That's the point. For the rest of the morning, she dragged me around town to the outdoor market, to a mellow little bookstore, to a pottery class where I accidentally created something that looked like a misshapen ashtray but was apparently symbolically powerful. By lunchtime, I felt lighter than air. By evening, I felt rooted for the first time in my life. Healing doesn't always look like epiphanies and revelations. Sometimes it looks like a woman in her 60s laughing so hard she almost chokes on a tortilla chip. That night, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned its usual lavender, I walked down to the river alone. The water glimmered, the cicadas sang, the air smelled like dust and possibility, and standing there, wrapped in desert dusk, I whispered to myself, this is my life now, not borrowed, not given, not earned through sacrifice, just mine, my own, the most radical thing I'd ever claimed. I thought about my daughters not with anger, but with distance, a gentle, compassionate distance, one that didn't deny love but didn't surrender to it either. I thought about Bill, driving home in his rental car, stunned that the quiet wife he overlooked had grown into someone he could no longer predict. And finally, I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who waited for approval, who begged for scraps of affection, who shrank herself into invisibility. I closed my eyes and whispered a soft goodbye to her. When I opened them, I saw Jack walking down the path, sketchpad tucked under his arm, looking at me with that warm steadiness. Evening, he said as he stopped beside me. Evening. We stood there, two people who had lost things, found things, survived things, and somehow ended up in the same small corner of the world at the same time. The river murmured at our feet, the sky opened its wide, wild arms, and I truly felt joy. Not the conditional joy of being needed, not the fragile joy of pleasing others. A deep, sovereign joy born from reclaiming myself. Jack glanced at me, his voice low and gentle. You look happy, Eleanor. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't second-guess my answer. I am. Not because I found a man, not because my family wanted me back, not because I escaped, but because I rebuilt, I reinvented, I returned to myself. And standing there beside the river, under the endless New Mexico sky, I realized the greatest truth of all. My new life didn't begin the day I left them. It began the day I chose me.